the last couple of years, it kind of came up like.
I read everyone's. I always read everyone's like bio before I come in, and I forget immediately who everyone is.
We're gonna read through that.
Known almost exclusively on
Go ahead.
props to
Recording.
history.
Okay.
I talk about film prop history,
Um,
film history,
How
etc.
fun!
I have a podcast called the Prop History Podcast. I'm a one so it comes down
I
to.
gotta tell my producer. So I'm doing a conference with my producer. My producer did set design and creation for the City Opera House.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. She's amazing, and yes, and very British, and therefore charming. And she
Or condescending.
Be-
because either way.
no, actually no, you're right, but no, she's very lovely, and they'd be delighted. I'm sure on a podcast. But I was referring to telling her to listen.
I mean, just in that side of it.
Yes, I would think they'd
And
be
everything
very
else.
interested though. I mean, when I was in high school, when I was in play, the stage crew was very passionate about stage. Like people who know about prop really know about prop. It's a whole art.
We're very small.
I mean, I appreciate it though. I've always, I have great friends that I've been doing it for years. And Jess, I guess, my producer, yes. Genre.
I'm really good friends with a lot of people in the brewing world,
Mhm.
also myself.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
The
just
kind of
every small
They're probably they have an audience.
So they look like artists now because we can't afford sports cars.
That is sad but true. My business partner, my business partner, also she works for me. She's a community manager. And I found it. I think Charles makes it.
Oh, okay.
Unless he's not coming. Oh, then he's dead. Or gone. So, like, no, it exploded. Like 3 times without doing this on the podcast. She's like, I can't talk now.
I mean, honestly, so much social media.
For sure. That's great though, right? That's amazing.
Which,
But actually also proves how effective that is.
yeah. And I was surprised. Yes,
They offer TikToks.
what's that?
They offer TikToks.
A lot of it,
Really?
but I mean, I did use a lot of it after the town.
Right.
It just
Your
so
screen's
many
being shown.
shops were closed. People couldn't come in, so they were going to independent market.
Cool. It's big, yeah. And that's really good. That's something major to do. Really nice and major. It's unfortunate.
I mean, in fairness, it is a quality mustache.
It is beautiful feature right here. Amazing. It really is.
I, for whatever power might be out there.
You need a clear mask so you can appreciate it.
You mean like a plastic bag? Is that what you're saying?
No, like what people use when they're using a
face shield almost.
yes,
Oh, I see.
clear, so they can admire the work without having to guess what's underneath.
Did it start class? It did start. Okay. Just write down everyone's names real quick. Ben, Jessica,
Yes.
Mike.
Yep.
Yacov. Alex. Okay. Let's make sure I remember.
Don't leave, Todd. I'm kidding. I'm just,
All right. Well, thank you for waking up this morning. Appreciate y'all. My name is Sean Weiland. Hello. This is From Inception to Posting. Let's get your podcast out there. And I have some panelists with me that hopefully have some experience in podcasting. I know I got your names and didn't ask any other questions. So why don't we go down from Jessica and quickly introduce yourselves, please, and kind of say a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. If you can hear me. Can you hear me? I'm assuming. Okay. I'm Jessica Kupferman. I am the co-host and co-founder of the women's podcasting community, She Podcasts. We have a show. We have a free Facebook support group for women and non-binary individuals that want to start or be supported along their podcasting journey. We have an online membership, and we have a conference. We did our first one at the Atlanta Marriott Marquis last year, which is how I met Charles, who invited me to do these panels. And then this year, it's going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona on October 14th. It's going to be really fun.
My name is Michael Corrie, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the Prop History podcast. I talk about film props and film history. I'm also the owner of MTS Props, a prop shop in Indianapolis, and I'm known primarily on social media as Props to History, where I talk about film props and the stories behind how they're made and what they're made from.
Hi there, I am Rob Roberts, and I'm probably best known for a show I co-created 19 years ago called Orange Lounge Radio, which is about video games and gaming culture, and it's available at the Voice of Geeks Network at vognetwork.com, streaming Sunday nights live on Twitch at twitch.tv/vognetwork.
Hey, my name is Yacov Freedman. I'm the senior podcast producer for Turner Classic Movies, the greatest network in the world. And we have a terrific podcast called The Plot Thickens that we just wrapped up our second season of, and we are going to launch our third season next month. So check it out.
Sweet. And again, I'm Sean Weiland. I'm a podcaster and voice actor, and a former award-winning game developer and bartender. and yeah. And so the reason this panel specifically came about is probably 3 years ago on this track. There'd be a few sort of ask me about your tech kind of panels. I think we still have some of those, but we didn't really have an actual workshop or walkthrough for how to create a podcast. And I noticed a lot of people coming in were saying, "Hey, I want to do this podcast. What should I do?" And that's a kind of a big meat of a question. So we started kind of crowd sourcing, but hive minding. This little worksheet, which is up here, it was originally 12 steps, now it's 13. So let's try to keep you on the wagon of basically what you need to think about when you're creating a podcast. So I know you all can't see this.
I can.
Okay. Wow, you have good eyes. I'll zoom it in a little bit so it's a little bit easier for the audience to see. Bam, there we go. And maybe I'll kind of scooch this out. So if you really want to, I'm going to read through these real quick. And I'd like to get a little bit of maybe comments from our panelists. If there's something that speaks to you, of course, be like, "Hey, can I talk about that?" So the first thing from Inception to posting is Inception. I have an idea. You do want to flush out your idea, make sure it's very specific. You can't be just I want to talk. Well, okay, you could just talk about coffee, but generally there's already a podcast about the thing that you're thinking. So you want to get really honed down, even if it's just your take. I am a blacksmith and I want to talk about coffee. All right, you're already narrowing it down. But you really want to get specific about what your idea is. And I'm sure a bunch of you can speak to this, but is partners. Are you going to work with anyone? And I can extol in all these, but I'm curious if anyone has anything to say about partnerships or working with other people in podcasting.
I'll go. I am not a shy person, but as someone who finds themselves endlessly amusing, I find that I work better and am more amusing when I have someone with me who's the straight guy, someone to either make fun of or laugh at my jokes. And it sounds like I'm being arrogant and kidding, but really, I'm not. I'm best when I can bounce off someone else. The energy of having someone else makes me think quicker. It makes me, as they're talking, sort of figure out what to heckle based on what they're saying. I always find that I'm better with a co-host. I've done one solo show, and it was very strange for me to talk to myself. I thought, I was very, weirded out about it. It took me a while to get used to it. But then every other show that I've attempted, and I only have one right now that's live, but first I did an interview show. And it was great but it was me talking to someone else every time. And then all the others have been co-hosted, which can take some getting used to, but I find that it's much better I find you can get the best content with one consistent person. You know what they're like, they know what you like, you know what they want to talk about, they know what you want to talk about, and you can really really get this amazing chemistry from another person.
Awesome. Thank you.
My podcast was actually born of conversations that took place between my podcast partner, Greg, and myself, because we're both prop makers. And in the prop making world, a lot of the knowledge about where things come from and how they're made kind of tends to stay in-house. And we realized that that information might actually be interesting to other people. So we realized that we were sitting in a weird little niche that no one had really done a podcast about before. And we had all these stories from all these people that we knew within the community. And turns out it is actually interesting to a lot of people who love film and film history. It's that look behind that veil that most people never really think to even look behind. And it ended up working out rather well. And that partnership, like the roles that we both have, it turns into just he and I having a conversation about something we both love anyway. And it comes across that way, apparently. So it worked out between the two of us quite well.
I know a lot of shows that started that way. They're very successful.
Can I add one point? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just say I would just be very careful too, is that it's easy to assume that just because somebody is like a really good friend of yours that they're necessarily going to make a great podcast host. And that is true in a lot of scenarios, but it may not be true in every situation. And I think it's okay to evaluate that because, if you ask your friend to do a podcast because you think, it might be fun, the answer might be, yeah, sure. But if there's that kind of like lack of enthusiasm about the topic or about the product, they might be wanting to do something which just because you're their friend, which is cool, but you want to make sure that you are connecting and having people on your show that are enthusiastic and have that similar vision that you do. Because otherwise, I think you could lead down that path where, I'm busy. Something else came up. Something I'm more passionate about came up today in our regular recording slot. So I think it's important to find not just somebody you kind of connect with, but somebody that is passionate about it as well.
And I would just add, everybody here was speaking about the creative side of it and the vision and what you want to communicate and how you want to communicate. And they're all 100% correct. But podcasting is not a solitary business. If you want your podcast to be successful, you're going to have to think in terms of working with other people. You have to think in terms of network partnerships and production partnerships and platform partnerships and interviewing people. So if the vision that you have is sitting behind a microphone and talking and editing it really nicely, you can put that out there, but it's going to be a real struggle to get listeners. So think in terms of reaching out and contacting and working with as many people as possible.
Excellent point. And that actually leads into like the next 3 bullet points on here, so which is fantastic. And we already started kind of brushing on this, but the next thing I have on here is just agreement and roles. So within if you have a partnership or if you have someone that's helping you, is being clear about what you're supposed to be doing. You might have Mike, like your co-host, but maybe one of you is responsible for literally hitting the record button.
Yeah, that's me.
And that's you. But if you didn't think about it, be like, oh wait, so who's on duty for that, or who's editing, or who's going to post it, or who's gonna set up the relationships that Yacov was just talking about. Is you want to be sure that you know how you're working together, what your roles are, and it's okay. Like maybe this week, like, hey, can I try doing that? Sure.
We solved the editing issue by just not doing it.
Woohoo!
That's an option.
We just record it raw and then post it, and that's it. Because I think both of us are a bit too lazy to edit, and that's what it comes down to.
And
There's nothing wrong with that. I do a very similar thing.
Yeah, it works well.
My first show was like that too. As far as rules, though, I think there is this to be said. I would advise people who do have a co-host that it is. I mean, to his point earlier, like it's sometimes good if you have a friend and they might want to do a podcast, but if you don't have equal work to do, one partner always gets resentful of the other partner. And I forgot to mention earlier, my group has 20,000 women in it. So the most common question that I get about partners, or the most common complaint we see, is my co-host will not toe the line. And sometimes it's just a matter of they won't post it on their own social media. But still, you agreement is the key word there. Before you start, I think it's important to say, you agree to do these things, I agree to do these things, we're both going to do these things, because you never want to start being resentful of the person you have to have a charming conversation with. It doesn't always work out that way. So
Can I put in a word for editing? The people on this panel are podcasting professionals. They know how to sit in front of a microphone and speak and make it engaging and make it entertaining. Not everybody starts out that way. And editing can be really, really important. And I think it's worthwhile to get other opinions when you have a podcast episode locked and loaded. let somebody listen to it before you publish. And if they say it's too long or it's draggy in this situation, take the advice. And editing is very easy these days. Virtually every desktop or every laptop will have some sort of editing software. And if not, there's free stuff you can download, and cut pieces out. Cut out stuff that you don't like. Put your best foot forward and think about length as well. There are two kinds of podcast listeners. There's sort of an older generation that will be happy with something that's between 45 minutes and an hour. But the younger generation really likes it to top out at 28 minutes. That's what the data says. So think about that in terms of who you're trying to reach.
Jessica, you're shaking your head. What say you?
I don't agree with most of that. I'm sorry. Because I think that, first of all, editing is very time consuming. And for us, our mission is to help women get their messages and stories out into the world however they can. Many women don't have 3 hours to edit, even if it is free to do so. So it's okay to have the raw conversation and just post it if that's what gets it out there. Also, for me, as far as 28 minutes is concerned, I realize that people say that in podcasting because the average commute is 28 minutes. But for me, when I was doing interviews, if you're doing an in-depth interview, it's very difficult to get to the meat before 20 minutes. You have to make them relaxed. You have to relate to them. You have to get some stories out of them. And then they start really revealing stuff around the 20-minute mark. So for me, the sweet spot for those shows were 45 minutes to an hour. And people still listened, and they will still listen. Like our show right now is sometimes a little over 60 minutes, and we still have 1,000 downloads an episode. So I'm not sure that's necessarily true. I think what matters as far as time is, what does your content need? You can try for 28 minutes. If it always ends up to be 48, that's your sweet spot.
I'd like to say that you're both right.
Thank you.
And it really depends on the format and the purpose of your podcast.
True.
Right. Can I jump in? Because I also just want to respectfully present another perspective on the time thing as somebody who does a 2.5 to 3 hour show every week. So it's that live experience, I think, for us, and the live formatting. And sometimes people actually kind of like some of that extended stuff in the fill-in because it also gives you more time to elaborate, get a little more personal. And I also have found in the feedback that we get from our listeners is that because we're a little bit of a longer show, we're filling a different sort of niche for people. It's not actually the commuters that I hear from. It's I'm sitting down at my desk doing my job on Mondays, and like, thank you for doing your show because it gives me that sort of background. So, but again, I think this is all all these different perspectives are very good because these are the conversations you all ought to be having in creating your podcast. Is what is my vision there? Because absolutely, a 28-minute show and so forth, there's a great place for that as well. What is it that you want to do? You have to kind of weigh all these options.
That's why we're here.
And Rob, I was actually, since we're kind of right next to it, and I feel like maybe I should just read off these real quick, just so we know kind of what we're going to get into. And we're going to spend like a minute or two on each of the rest of these, because I actually do want to get some audience questions and suggestions for like a podcast. We're going to work through this as though this was your idea. So we're going to quickly touch on businesses, setting up your equipment and space, format, planning and research, icons or like branding for your show, recording, editing, publishing, promoting, and engaging with your audiences. But Rob, you mentioned earlier, like the business aspect. Like, do you file for like registering as an LLC or as an S corp or something? And planning on monetizing and how and on what platforms? And that kind of, there's a little bit I had in there is who owns what. But if you're going to set it up as a business, you have to be sure that you know who owns your product.
Yeah, I think the quick feedback I could give on that bullet point is that money can be a very uncomfortable issue. Also, not everybody's getting into podcasting to make money. I didn't. And so that is a completely fine perspective as well. Again, it's about just aligning on the same page with all of your partners. And even though that money might be an uncomfortable conversation, it's going to be far more uncomfortable if your show suddenly goes viral and you're getting those offers, and then you have to have the money conversation. That's what can drive people apart. So I think it is good to talk about in the beginning, are we going to try to get subscriptions on Twitch while we do our show? Are we going to try to solicit ads? And what are we going to do with that money? Does 100% of it go back into the show? Do we try to use that money to recruit more talent? Do we pay ourselves, which is a totally legitimate thing? Do we donate the money to charity? The options are limitless, but you just need to discuss them, because if you don't have yourself aligned up front, it's going to be very uncomfortable later on.
We started our podcast with the idea that it was not going to be monetized at all under any circumstances. But now it's fallen to the point where we're getting sponsorships from different production companies, and
I just can't not make money.
right. And so
Hate that.
it's all been blanketed under the licensing that I have for my prop shop. So that's how it's, because it all just falls under one roof now.
Sure.
But we've already had this uncomfortable conversation about how things will be split when that time comes. But we get paid in movie props though, so that's hard to divide up.
Ooh, that's tough. And I will say, I've had pretty much all the experiences. Having worked in games, indie games, of like having to set up a business and like a multi-owner partnership, or my podcast. My co-host thought of the idea, so he said, "Well, it's my idea. Like, that's great." I also registered everything,
Yeah.
so I own all
And?
of the ideas.
Yeah.
And I don't say this to be mean or to be a chooch. I was trying to think of a non-swear word.
That's a good one.
But you need to be aware of what's going on, and if you're the one, you're doing maybe more of the lion's share of the work, especially if you're the one that hits record and has the audio files, well, then you own them. That's how recording rights work. So just again, be very aware of what you're doing and spell it out first. It's better to have an uncomfortable conversation than ending a friendship.
Sometimes when you start your show, though, you really have no idea if you'll ever make money, and you just don't know where it's going to go. So Elsie and I started ours. She just had always wanted to do a show about podcasting just done by women, and so she asked me to do it with her. So yeah, it was her idea, but we never even looked at the downloads. We were just doing it, and if people wanted to listen, they listened. It was a side project because we both had other jobs. And then slowly, as we started to get advertisers, I set up a PayPal account under the name She Podcast. People would pay that, and then I would just split it out, her PayPal and my PayPal. And we did that for like 5 years. We never needed a business. We never needed anything until we wanted to do a conference, because, business lines of credit, paying hotels, like you kind of need a business for that. So that we only set it up out of need, but we did have that conversation. Like, okay, if this becomes a business, do you want part ownership of this business? Do you want to be an employee of this business? Like, luckily we were friends enough to be able to have this conversation, like, without feeling tense about it. Like, we're very close now. So I'm lucky in that respect. Also, that she doesn't want to own anything ever. She would rather be an employee everywhere than own anything. So that makes it very easy, but that's a very rare situation. So just another perspective.
Thank you. So
Welcome.
moving on to setting up equipment in space, and I think we pretty much run the gamut on this panel.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to think that Yacov has like a giant soundstage where he just produces podcasts on them.
We have a lot of different people working on it, so
Yeah.
it's a big, complicated organization.
So can you quickly speak to kind of what like the high end version of producing a podcast that might be like?
Yeah, you record really to start, you have story meetings and you have scripts that are written, and so that you know what you're getting into. And then you record all of the audio, and that includes interviews and tracks that come between the interviews and any of the audio that you find that you want to include, and you get it all into one place and you edit it. And the editing software that we use ranges. It depends on which editor is working on it. One of our best editors uses Premiere, which is not really an audio editing software, but that's what he's comfortable with. And it's an expensive system too. So you got to look at that in terms of what you want your budget to be. And we have a lot of resources because Turner Classic Movies is part of a big media corporation, and we can tap into those. And we're relatively lucky because of that. But there are places that will let you come in if you're looking for a really good sound quality recording and record for probably not very much. And it's always going to sound a little better than your home studio, unless you have a really good home studio, which is doable. But then you're the guy that has foam on his living room walls, and that looks a little strange.
I mean, now I have a room for it, but I totally have foam.
I feel attacked.
But
But that's not your living room anymore. That's your studio.
Yeah, that's my studio. Yeah.
Does anyone want to speak quickly to the like the I hate to say it, the low end, but like the starting out, like the
Yeah.
recording on your phone?
I actually started out as like a kitchen table podcast, like
Yeah.
a lot of them do, moving back and forth between myself and Greg's house. And we've now moved it into a dedicated studio space in the prop shop. So we're surrounded by film props while we're doing it. So it's quite a good environment to do it in. but we still use I hate to use the term low end, but I guess starter equipment, and we've not upgraded it at all the entire time, and it works beautifully for us. We've managed to have a relatively successful podcast on an extremely low budget, and
Right.
it works.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you might want, depending on what your podcast is, to have a very clean, professional sound edited that's knocks it out of the park. I mean, like Turner Classic Movies, I think they'd be expected to have that quality. But for special interest podcasts where literally it's experts talking about what they do, it's okay to have that informal sound. Yeah, so you can think about your sound and think about how you want it to be. And wow, that's actually leads right into the next.
Wait, can I just point
idea.
out one thing? Sometimes it's really good to have bad sound. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but something that has depth to the sound, as if you're recording outside and you're walking along, and this is how reporters usually do it, it really adds a certain depth and makes it a lot more fascinating to listen to. So there's a good thing by having just your phone recording you as you walk around. And of course, phones these days have great sound. In addition to that, if you're going to do an interview, the pandemic has been good for podcasts because we have all of these tools at our disposal now that we really didn't think about beforehand. Zoom, which everybody uses, has really good audio, and you can record it effectively for free, and it'll even give you split audio tracks that you can
StreamYard
use.
too is really good audio and video.
Yeah, and video is really important because if you record your podcast, you can put it up on YouTube or other platforms that will give you an entirely new audience. So there's a lot of stuff that's cheap and easy and free and still gives you good sound and gives you this engagement with you and your interviewer and your guests that is really not available outside of just face-to-face stuff, which
Yeah, man.
people don't do
I
anymore.
started with Skype. That was the worst.
The
Oh.
only
That was
thing
the worst.
the only thing I really have to add is that, after 19 years, my setup's okay. We have a middle ground microphone, and it's not the greatest, but I've never had a listener complain that it can pick up the cat meowing in the other room.
I get told that mine can pick up the 3D printers in the printer room all the time, so that I have to be cognizant of.
But that's cool stuff. If you hear a 3D printer, how often do you get to hear that? I'd be interested in that.
Yeah.
It's that ambience that you're talking about.
It
whether
becomes
it's,
more
your
annoying
family
when it's 15 printers going at once.
That sounds annoying.
I started with like a blue snowball. It wasn't the best sound, and I didn't always even remember to have it on. And nobody really said how great my audio was, but like I got a $70 ATR 2100 off of Amazon. People kept asking me what my mic was, how expensive it was. They thought it was like the top of the line. It wasn't, but it does have really good sound, and it is a condenser mic, which means it blocks out 3D printers and whatever else is going on. And then we were gifted from the company Heil. We were gifted pod mics, which are meant to be for podcasting against they're condensers, but also the PR30 specifically is supposed to make a woman's voice sound smooth, and it does. It's really good. People are always asking us what we use. I think Heil. The tech part is not my forte, but they also have a very small mixer that is very professional. You can get that for not too much money. And then also we use Adobe Audition, which is like $10 a month through Adobe, but they do have, even though it's not free, a little more features to mix if you want the other person to sound equally as loud as you, because that's the kind of thing that you can't control when you're doing interviews. But I just wanted to give you guys those resources, as well as, like he said, Zoom, StreamYard, which is free, and Riverside FM, which is just like the other two. Don't remember if it's free or not, but it's not very expensive. But they do 4K video as well as high def sound, and you get it all separate, so you can do what you need to do with it. That's
Cool.
all.
We knocked out the next bullet point too in formats. That's perfect.
Oh.
No. That's great. So I separated everything out, but these are all related, obviously, because they're all about the same thing. But all that kind of leads into like what is like the overall like audio style of my podcast. How do I want it to sound? And so it is important to think about that and to look at those kinds of resources, from software to equipment to space. So awesome. So the next bullet point I had is planning and research. Like, are there similar podcasts out there? What's my release schedule? For either like when do I first put it out or how often do I put it out? And which is just kind of good things to plan. Does everyone do a weekly podcast?
We've started to record to do a weekly podcast. We've only been doing bi-weekly.
Yeah.
And we've learned the hard way that you must absolutely keep to your schedule. Otherwise, people get very angry at you because they expect it. And it may be because the prop community is that way, that they really want their information
not
now.
just the prop community.
But when we started, because I noticed on there it says similar podcasts, when we started doing research to see if we even wanted to do this, there had only been one other podcast about movie props before then, which made us hesitate because it existed for 5 episodes and then went away. But now I think we're 20 episodes in and doing quite well. People seem to dig it. So
Cool. Yeah, that's like I said kind of before. It's kind of tough if there's a lot of podcasts about what you want to talk about. But if not, and especially like if there's 1 to 5 episodes, in my mind, like, well, they didn't do it right.
well, I went through and listened to those 5 episodes, and it seemed fine. But I wasn't. Maybe they just didn't want to do it anymore. I don't know.
They didn't talk about it beforehand. Who's doing what?
That's
right.
what it is.
Just quickly on the bullet of similar podcasts,
Yeah.
I think because podcasting's been around for a long time, there probably is already a similar podcast. Like, what is it, Rule 37 of the internet? Somebody's probably done it. So I would think, what is it that makes your perspective on it unique, right? Like, I do video games. There are like 10,000 video gaming podcasts out there, right? So what is it that makes your gaming podcast unique? What is it that you're going to bring to the table? But I always advise people who ask me kind of about like starting their own podcast, if your niche on doing a gaming podcast is, oh, well, it's my friends and I sitting around a table talking crap about video games, I will say, do not do that podcast, because it needs to be something that you're enthusiastic about, something that you're positive and happy on. I'm not saying that you can't be critical of things that you love, but when I hear that somebody's perspective is, I just want to sit around and talk crap about video games, it's like, don't bring that negativity out here. So, something to think about.
Yeah, Rob is 100% correct. Stay positive and figure out your niche. And also don't be discouraged, because you can go on and find a ton of podcasts within your lane, but that doesn't mean they're all active. There's a huge attrition rate when it comes to podcasts. People start them and people stop them pretty quickly. And they need to have some sort of commitment going in order for it to be successful. So think about it in this term. There are 2 million podcasts out there. That's the number that's usually thrown around. It sounds like a lot, but it's not. There's over 1 billion websites out there, but everybody says you need a website. And there's 30 million YouTube channels, but everybody doesn't hesitate to start their own YouTube channel. So really, if you look at podcasts as an opportunity, it's still got a lot of growth potential. And you should be encouraged, and you should think in terms of, what can I add and how can I do it?
And to add on to that, you don't necessarily have to have an answer to how will my podcast be different, because that answer often is you. They're not you. They don't have your perspective, your education, your experience, your knowledge, your family history, your current social life. You are the unique factor sometimes that makes it interesting. So I mean, search for that answer. Yes, as far as how will you be different, but if the answer is you, I think that's okay.
And to add on to what Yacov was saying about negativity, even if you're talking about a subject that you don't like, it's best to not be negative about it. By all means, be critical, but being negative about it will immediately push people away from you, because nobody really wants to hear that. Critical
or you'll
is
have
fine.
all trolls, right?
Critical
for
is
an
fine,
audience.
but being overly negative it's not ideal.
Yeah, what you put out there can be very quickly what you get back.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The example I use all the time about criticism versus negativity, it's a little bit of an obscure reference, but I'm going to go with it anyway. It's from one of the greatest television shows in history, America's Next Top Model. Okay. And Tyra Banks was the host of that show. And in one of the seasons of the show, a contestant really made her mad. And she got up there and she yelled. She said, "I was rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. How dare you?" Right? That was this whole scene. Some of you were laughing, so I know you know the show.
It's a good meme.
That's what it really is that, when you're rooting for something and then you recognize where those, failures are, that's a little bit of the criticism. But otherwise, if you're just sitting there going, this is crap, this is crap, this is garbage, it's just like, why is that fun to listen to?
It's not.
Nope.
So next, I think this is a short one, but we'll see in a second, is just having like a good, like a recognizable icon and a good boilerplate, or like a fast description of your podcast. Because a lot of times when you go to put it out on services, they'll be like, oh, so, you upload your picture here, and you're like, oh man, I didn't have a picture. And I don't know if this is a good selfie time. So like, I've gone to like Upwork, places like that, like had logos made for me. Hire artist, pays $75, and it's that might sound like a lot, especially if you're just first time, don't even know how much you want to invest, but it is worth it to even just put something together yourself, even if it's not that great, just so you have a recognizable logo for yourself. Anyone? Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
I just like to give resources because I feel like it's helpful.
Yeah.
Upwork is a great resource. I would also use, like, if you know Canva, they have templates called album covers, which are very good podcast cover art, believe it or not. Usually they're very simple. I would also say, unless you're super famous, don't bother putting your face on the cover of your podcast, because what you want to do is really entice people to listen. If they don't know who you are and your face is taking up the entire title and description, what will make them click on that? What is their incentive? I mean, you're probably lovely people, but I mean, remember, it's this big when they're looking at it. So you need something that's like, oh, what's that about? And it's not often our unknown faces. So that's my advice. So Canva, also PicMonkey has the album covers too, Upwork. But yeah, just try and make it about your topic or your title.
I was fortunate that I had a really good friend who's a professional graphic designer that created my logo that I used for social media that became viral rather quickly. And I had all of the logos for both my prop shop and for my podcast created by her, and they're all tied in together. So that similarity of brand across kind of ties everything under one similar logo, and it's kind of worked out for me that way.
Yeah.
On the tagline part of it, I think the easiest way to approach it is just imagine your podcast as a movie. What would the tagline be on the movie poster? You know,
Yes.
sit down, brainstorm, think about, and that also ties in a lot of the other points about what is your show all about and so forth. I think that's a good brainstorming session to have with your potential co-hosts to really draw out what makes your show unique.
Something really basic, just when it comes to the icons of podcasts, is try to avoid it getting washed out on you. Most people are discovering these things on their phone, and most people are using either a white background or a black background. So if you've got a lot of black or if you've got a lot of white in your icon, it can just kind of get lost. So try to have some sort of background that's a different color other than those two.
No, I put my head down because I have a black and white logo.
Oh,
No, black and
Or black
white
and white
is
icon.
one thing if it contrasts nicely, but you don't want to have like a giant white background behind you and it just kind of get lost. It makes your whole icon seem a lot smaller.
And don't be afraid of color. Turns out 1980s
color's good.
neon works really
Oh,
well.
yeah.
yes, it does.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I think the next few points are we've kind of touched on a little bit. But so you've done all your pre-planning, you've got your idea, you've got your logos, you've set up what you're going to do. The next part really is to hit record, and it can be on something as simple as your phone to a high-end DAW, like a digital audio workstation. Run Pro Tools or run Adobe, and plug in your mics and have your interfaces and all that stuff, which is great, but it gets really complicated. So it's fine to just start with your phone. Yeah, I mean, honestly, just hit record. Just start doing it. Give it a shot.
Yeah.
And there are a ton of free resources too for both uploading, editing, and creating your podcast that cost you absolutely nothing. I use Anchor.fm, and I can do everything through their website because I'm not a technical person. I don't know how a lot of that equipment works. So I just have to use what resources are available to me. And Anchor has worked for us since we started. So that's one option to go with.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Anchors, they don't they own your content. It's very hard if you want to switch from Anchor to go to a proper, not proper, or I'll say a proper podcast host. It's very hard to switch from Anchor because right now I think even Todd was telling me they don't even give you an RSS feed to like export anymore. So you'll have to re-upload everything again if you want to do a Blueberry host or Libsyn or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but
Well, clearly there is.
I mean, it's working for you. That's wonderful. If you've never switched, then it's not a problem. But most people end up switching, and Anchor is usually a problem when you do that.
Just know your options.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention that under the publishing notes.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's something very critical to think of is when you go to use a service to publish is to know what their terms of service are.
Use
Read them.
Blueberry.
And you can use SoundCloud. You can use
No.
Blueberry.
Blueberry.
You can.
Do not use SoundCloud. Please do not use
Get
SoundCloud.
out, Sean. Get out.
Thank you,
It's
Charles.
an option. It's
No,
not a
it's
great
not.
one.
It is not an option.
It's really a bad one.
Do you,
Yeah.
don't get him started back there. He will come up here and take over this whole panel about SoundCloud and Anchor.
Is there a
Don't do
resource? Is there a resource for people to go and find out what the better options would be for someone who is unfamiliar with all this stuff that would be wanting to look into it?
Dragon
I
Con.
mean, yeah, a
Dragon
conference,
Con. This
podcast
panel.
movement,
Us
Podfest,
pretty
She
much.
Podcast Live. Like conferences usually have every host, and you can go check them out. And they're all different. They all have different pros and cons. They all have different interfaces. I don't want to say they all do the same thing because they all slightly skew. Podbean, for an example, is an amazing host, but one thing that they have that most people don't have is you can live stream through your audio. Captivate is a good host, and they have really beautiful marketing tools. Libsyn has amazing customer service. Blueberry has amazing interface and customer service. They're all different, but SoundCloud, there's a reason why it's free. It's the terrible, right? It's the terrible. Wait, the other thing I wanted to say was in my membership, the most common thing that podcasters have a problem with is up until this point, everything is taken care of. But then it's 2 years before they start recording. You're thinking about it and redoing it and thinking about it. What about my branding and my tagline and my show notes, my description? And it's like they never hit record. This is the most important part, right? It's like on Seinfeld. It's not important to take the reservation. You have to hold the reservation, right? Push the button and talk and just see what happens. That's all.
100%
We're done
agree.
here.
If you're thinking about creating content, what's stopping you? Do it.
Well,
Charles,
let me just push back.
Sorry, just kidding.
If you want to do something that takes a while to produce, take the time to produce it.
Mhm.
And if you want to do something that has a whole lot of different sounds and a whole lot of editing involved, make sure you're actually doing the work. But if you think you need a month or two to actually get that first episode out, take it. Just keep your goals in mind and make sure that you're always working towards them.
Hi, I'm Charles. To answer Michael's question, big fan, process. I want to catch you after this. To answer your question about how people can research it, because if you're starting to think about this stuff, right, you're not necessarily going to go to a convention. DragonCon Digital Media Track puts all the videos of everything we recorded for the last 4 or 5 years on our YouTube channel. So there's panels that talk about this throughout the years. You can also, when you do the Google search, do like SoundCloud versus, and pick one, Anchor, Blueberry, Spotify,
come up too,
and then
right?
you'll see the headlines. But the third thing I would always say is reach out to your favorite content creator. I mean, you got 5 of them sitting here on the stage that do awesome stuff. Go, where do you do your thing? And most time the creators will answer you and give you some advice.
Also, Facebook groups, there's at least 5 that you can join. And it has been asked 1 billion times in each one. So you can just search at any podcast Facebook group host and get your answer.
And Joe did just remind me, we do have an open DragonCon Digital Media Discord that you can get into. And we have tech rooms and everything where you can ask all kind of questions about microphones, where should I host? And the community, not just the experts or one person, the community comes together and gives you free advice.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm always open to answering questions too.
What's
If you
your
don't
name
want a whole
again?
community, they call me Esteban. So right after record, I had edit, which we kind of just touched on, and it's whether or not you want to edit. If you're going to do a high-end podcast, and take the time to edit. Take out the clicks and the pops and the breaths and put in some sound effects. Or if it's a natural-sounding podcast, don't. But do think about whether or not you're going to do it. And if you need to, do it. One of my podcasts, I publish seasonally. Partly because it involves a lot of drinking and it's hard to do on my liver. So I put out 12 episodes a year. I usually put them all out in one batch, kind of like a drop. And I edit it as well because it takes 3 hours to record and I bring it down to about half an hour. And I just get I get the meat of it. Because again, drinking, a lot of banter. But after that, publish. And then, which we kind of already just talked about, different platforms, but then promoting social media, having your emails, having everything line up that's the same as your brand is super, super important. Mm-hmm. And I mean, technically you want to do that first before you publish, but I didn't know where to put this part. But check, make sure that you can get the same Twitter as Instagram, as Twitch, because you might live stream some of your episodes. It's really important to have a consistent branding throughout.
Can I add one thing to that?
Please, yes.
Website. I know it sounds archaic, but the absolute best tool for podcast discovery is Google. And people will type in a topic. They don't know where it's going to go. But if you've got a podcast that actually hits that exact topic, they will find that. And it really helps to have a website. It doesn't just mean have a website where you can press play and listen to your podcasts. If you want to take it to a next step, and this is a lot of work sometimes, put transcripts of your episodes on there, because that is enormous for SEO, and every little word counts. So there's a whole lot of things, in addition to the fact that it's very good for ADA compliance. So it's a win all around. But think about your podcast. Think about how you are putting out the episodes. If you're doing, let's say, a podcast about a TV show, and you want to talk about one particular episode, title your podcast episode the same title as the episode. Because if people are looking for that episode, if they're a Babylon 5 fan and they're looking for the episode about signs importance, put in signs and importance as your episode title, people will find it. So there's a certain amount of just thinking about how people are going to learn and discover your podcast, and a website is a huge component of that.
But if you can't do all those features out the gate, like, again, I do a 3-hour podcast, being able to do transcripts of that is just not something that's, as an independent broadcaster, is not something that's really available to me. I would love to do it. I'd love to do all the live captioning and dump and things like that, but it's just not a technology that works for our setup at this time. So if you can't do all those things, that's okay. Again, I would fear that somebody would not want to get in and do a podcast and do a show because of certain tech hurdles. And I just don't want tech hurdles to stop anybody, if that's okay with you. But again, if you are in it to make a very professional sounding, slick show that is very advertiser friendly from the start and all that stuff, then yeah, you do have to consider many of those things. Just, again, weigh your options.
Yeah. And remember, technology is really time consuming, but there are ways that technology can also solve a problem. So there's transcription tools out there. They're not going to be perfect. They'll sometimes take one word and substitute a completely different word, but you got 99 out of 100 correct. So it's worth sometimes looking into these things if you really want to have those up there.
Descript is one of those. Otter.ai is one of those too. Otter specifically works with Zoom. So when you're done your Zoom call, you just get an email that says your transcription is ready. Yeah. It's pretty exciting, I think. I also think it's really good to have your social media work towards your listeners, and then you send your listeners to your social media. So you always have it's like the circle of promotion is always working. You tell them on the show, hey, follow me on social media. You tell them on social media, hey, don't forget about my episode this week. And around it goes. Once you have that happening on a regular basis, whether it's systemized or if you're doing it on your own, then the next step after that is to start expanding those circles to add more people. And there's various ways you can do that. But oftentimes I think that the hurdle to get published is so large that I think where you put engaging is at the right spot, because for some people, just getting the content right and having it done is it's a huge accomplishment for most people, even if you know exactly what you're doing, right? So the social media part and the growing the audience part, once you've done that hurdle, you immediately want all the listeners. So it can be very frustrating when no one's listening after you've done all that work. But that part is a process. It takes lots of time. It takes lots of patience. Sometimes it takes money to start growing that audience. So just be patient and go slowly, and and enjoy and have fun on your social media too, because that also is contagious and brings people in.
Yeah, and that's and you were looking.
I was looking.
But that's that last point is to engage. Talk to the people that you want to be reaching out to, and if they reach out to you, make sure you respond. That means that your listeners really want to have a conversation with you. And obviously, like Twitter or Instagram, there's not it's not a long format interaction, but still being able to touch base with people and to say thank you, it goes a long way.
Yeah, the engagement's been really, really important for my social media, because all of it was based on answering people's questions and telling stories. Mm-hmm. And the more I do that, the more people want to engage. And when you hit 350 to 400 questions a day now, it's harder to engage with everyone. Mm-hmm. But just the more you engage, the more people see that, and the more people want to engage with you now, because they see that you will respond as best you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, give them tools to engage. Don't just let them reply to you on Twitter. Say, hey, if you want to get our attention, leave us a review or rate us on any podcast app. And that goes a long way towards your podcast being discovered by the podcast platforms like Apple or Spotify or Stitcher. And those really help. So the more you can tell them what's a productive way for them to engage with you, the better their engagement will be and the more it benefits you.
I think the Apple thing might not work anymore. Like their algorithms have been messed up for kind of a while for rating and review. Not that you shouldn't tell people to do that, but I like to have them send me I like to ask direct questions. Have you ever had this discussion, or have you guys ever had this situation, or what do you think? Should we do this or this? And then have them send you an email or have them, write you on social, because you have more control over the two-way conversation if they can engage with you on social. And that used to be very true, that if they rated and review you, you would get to the top of the charts. But I don't know, I've been more and more, I don't think that works anymore.
You do need a lot of it. You need to have a critical mass in order to get noticed, but it is still possible. I mean,
Okay.
there are a lot of tricks to gaming the platforms. So that's just one of them.
Yeah.
So something I like to do at the end of my show is that I will say, if you liked what you heard here at the show, we don't need your money, but we would like you to tell a friend or two about the show. Help us spread the word, and a little bit of word of mouth goes a very long way. And because iTunes has just gotten overtaken by the celebrity podcasts and so forth that have, the ability to, send their existing fan base to iTunes and kind of, mess with that algorithm. I kind of feel like for me, a smaller broadcaster, that works a lot better. Like I'm not going to get back to the top of iTunes the way it used to be when it first launched. And that's okay.
And if you're a woman, just forget about it. There's about 5 in the top 100. So, I mean, it's much more important that you gather your audience, have control over what your messaging is to them, grow an email list, grow your social, because the idea that you'll be in the top 100 in Apple or really it's very, very low. There's so many white guys, as one of the podcasts are called, actually. So yes, here we all are.
But I would also say, you can have a lot of success without it. I mean, think about
Totally.
it. How many times have you looked for a podcast that was number 97 on the top 100 ranking? I kind of think it's more of a status thing for the podcaster than it really actually does help with
Agreed.
discoverability.
You don't need it at all.
I
agree.
just think that's
I have purposefully ignored the top
Same.
of podcasts.
you can't keep if you keep comparing yourself to other people,
Yeah.
you're always going to feel like you want to quit. So don't do that to yourself.
I would say they're 100% right about the top 100 rankings and even the top 200. Those are very hard to crack.
It's even the top
But look
500.
in terms of individual categories, and you can find a way. Those are really key to discoverability. If you're looking for somebody who is interested in one very specific thing, you can make a dent in how they find you in that category. And that's a way of finding new audiences.
So I will say, and that kind of goes back to defining your niche. Like right at the beginning, I was talking about like, what is my exact topic? What is this thing? Because then you can be the best podcast that talks about, Care Bears versus Pokemon, or whatever. He's like, yeah, we're the number one podcast for discussing this. Yeah, you are.
You can always say
Solid.
that.
And you can always say that. You can put that in your branding. It's great. Or your marketing.
The thing with comparing yourselves and charting and stuff is like 10 years ago, there was nobody else except each other that we were competing with. But now CNN, Washington Times, NPR, they all
Turner
have
Classic
podcasts.
Movies.
Yeah, like Wondery is a huge network with celebrities like Dirty John and stuff like that. Like it's almost like ranking yourself when you're in competition with that is like having an Etsy store and comparing yourself to Versace. Like you don't even look at Fashion Week because it doesn't apply. And that's what I think about podcasting now as far as charting and stuff. Like they have meetings with Apple every year to discuss who they're going to feature and like, and sometimes the rankers don't even look at anything unless you're like PodRank, I think or Pod Sites is one of those where like they only rank the ones that are being hosted on Art19, which is the host that like only big, large, like corporate podcasting companies use. So it's all of it is sort of like, just don't even bother with that, like just, it's a totally different goals what they have versus what we're doing.
So this was a really good rundown. We're actually already at like the last 10 minutes, which I don't know. I always think this list is so short, succinct. We can really dig into these, into these. So I was thinking that we could do like a quick run through of this of how it would go with an example topic. I don't know if we have time for that. So do y'all have a preference of whether we take some questions or try to run through a topic?
Do you guys have questions?
Does anyone have questions?
Does anyone have questions? Yeah.
I see a couple.
Yeah. All right, come on up. Let's do some questions. What is a podcast?
I thought this was about unicorns.
Well, unicorn podcast would be great. So question actually going back to hosting sites. I started doing audio producing 3 years ago, or 2017, and unfortunately the podcast I worked at, I Don't Hurt Me, went with SoundCloud. I've just been kept going. I've been doing more and more shows, and I've been using a variety of different hosts. I've never actually switched an RSS feed to another hosting site because I'm afraid if you do that, am I paying for 2 hosting sites? So when you switch it, is it really just that simple, and then you don't have to worry about losing?
Usually the customer service of the one you're going to will move the RSS feed for you.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you just pick the one you like, Todd, that's correct, right? Like if I wanted to go to Blueberry, I'd just be like, customer service at Blueberry, I'm on Libsyn help, and they would just do it. Yeah, they do it every day.
Oh, I'm good at doing that.
Yeah, but it's
Okay.
just that it is, yes, it's that easy.
Well, maybe I'll switch to Blueberry. So that sounds good.
You should.
Yeah.
They sponsored this track, and thank you for that.
Yeah,
Well, now I want to switch to
since,
Blueberry.
since we're right near the end, like I think I started using Blueberry like 2 years ago, and it is wonderfully user friendly.
Mhm.
I think right when the pandemic happened, I finally switched to dropping my podcast. I'm like, all right, here's all. I think I had 10 episodes for that season. I was like, I'm just going to drop all of them, and then I hit my upload limit, and I was like, oh right, these are still half an hour, decent quality. So like the 250 or 100 megs or whatever it was I was paying for, I just sucked it up. So I emailed them like, hey, pandemic's going on. I have a bunch of content. I want to put it out. Can I just expand my plan for this month and pay for this month, and they'll drop back down to $10 a month? And they were super cool. Like, hey, tell you what, we'll charge you like $5, and we'll put up like the whole gig of whatever you did. And yeah, they are a good hosting service. I really
Very
appreciate them because they're just willing to work with you. And yeah, to the RSS feeds, like I've seen that in their help sections of their facts, which is like, this is how you transfer it. So it's all very easily there. All right, I think I'm done kissing ass.
Excellent. The follow-up was going to be if the switching a hosting site was going to be not beneficial or beneficial, but I think you answered my question. So
Don't
thank
do
you
it a
very much.
lot, I'd say. I wouldn't do it a lot.
Yeah.
Once is probably best.
Something always goes wrong.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's complicated. Something always you don't want to do it a lot.
Hello there. This has been an awesome panel. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
The final point was engagement, and you talked about some of the ways that you engage with your listeners and everything. Is there a particular how do you know you're doing well? What's a type of engagement where somebody maybe says something, maybe it's a number of emails, but how do you gauge how well you think you're doing with your show?
For me, I always tell people, like, you're gathering an audience when they start talking to you. Like, I blogged for 8 years without so much as like 5 comments, like, ever. And then the second I started podcasting, it was like emails, 1 email like the first one, and 2 like the second one, and then not that I have an influx now, but when they start talking to you or tweeting, hey, today I was listening to this show, and thank you so much, Jess, for interviewing this person. And it may happen once or twice a week, but they start telling you. Podcast listeners are very loyal, and they're very outspoken, and they're very opinionated, like these guys said, about if you skip a show. So if you have like radio silence, no pun intended, then you have to start asking them more questions and engaging them more. But I think that one of the hugest measures of success is whether or not your audience is talking to you, period.
For me, it's very similar when I start to see conversations or questions that are started from a topic that I brought up on a podcast showing up in other social media platforms that I use. When those start to bleed over, you're starting to get that engagement. Yeah. I tend to get that every now and again, and when it happens, it's a really kind of a fun experience because I know I started that on the podcast, and here it is over on Instagram, and there's a second conversation about the same thing starting on TikTok. So it kind of works over from bleed over.
Very similar thing for me, except we've always had the nature of having a live chat room. So I'm able to get that instant gratification from people that are interacting with the show in real time. Back in the day, we were using IRC. I know not everybody knows what that is anymore. But, now that we're on Twitch, I think more people know what that is. And by doing our show live there, we're able to get that feedback in real time. And it also helps us shape the show a lot, especially when we're covering a topic with as many varied opinions as gaming and an industry that changes as much. Like having that instant gratification for us is a great thing.
At the risk of everybody on the panel hating me, you can just look at the raw numbers, and you can get analytics that'll say whether your show is growing, what topics are really resonating, and if there's a certain day that publishing will benefit. there's a whole lot of information out there, and you can just look at that and you can track the growth.
And I don't hate that answer, but I do want to say it is completely okay as well to not care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people,
It's
the reason
whatever you
why he
want.
said that is because a lot of people get really bogged down in how many people are listening every week, and they base their success on it, and they decide whether or not they're going to continue based on whether you have 200 over 500. And I think the average podcast has about 125 listeners per episode, which can be very discouraging if you're expecting thousands and thousands and thousands soon.
I have found that comparing my success to the success of others in anything is largely non-productive.
True, but just comparing it to yourself, people say compete with yourself, and you look and you're like 70 people listen. Why? And then you think like I always think like in terms of this, like if it's expensive to buy all those people lunch, you're doing good. You know, like 70 people for lunch is a big lunch. So that's like, that's a healthy listenership, I think.
Yeah.
And then, and then you can just sort of move from there.
And that's where numbers can be a great thing, is that you can actually see that growth and have proof
Yeah,
in the
that's true.
numbers.
So we're pretty close, and I would say to not to maybe to expand or just to comment on Yakov's point is that he works in a I'd say critical space, but a space that's very commercial. So
Oh, absolutely.
you have to be able
Oh, yeah,
to
that's
justify to someone else who's giving you money to do your podcast.
True.
This is how we're doing. And having worked in the corporate space for video games, it's very, very similar of like, no, this is what our user base is doing. This is how long they spent in the app. This is how long they were doing it. So I can go to them and go, look, our engagement is up. And success. So if your podcast gets that big, or you join a network or something like that happens, you do have to be at least aware of that those stats are out there, that maybe this hosting service you use has those stats, and you can go back and look historically. You're like, well, this is what we were doing before we joined your network, and now that we're on your network, look how we're doing. It's awesome, And so it's those can be important. But yeah, when you're starting out, I know my jaded response to that question in my head was, I don't care, because I do it because I like it, and that's really what you should do when you start is do something you love and just keep doing the thing that you love. Because people, and it kind of goes back to that positivity thing too, is people just share your joy.
Yeah,
They love to share your joy.
What's the word?
Happy?
No.
Oh.
Contagious.
Oh,
That's the word. Sorry.
communicable?
It's contagious. Enthusiasm is contagious.
Communicable.
So I think, we got like 2 minutes. Any last question? Okay, final thoughts. What's your favorite doll?
Barbie.
Doll.
Did you say doll or
Yeah.
dog?
I said DAW, doll, but I like that you said Barbie.
Doll. You said doll.
Doll.
Told you I was funny.
Doll. Editing software is doll, essentially. Editing.
So you can tell I'm not an editor.
That's fine.
Yeah. I still say Barbie.
I established that I don't edit anything, so I don't really know.
Cool.
I use Adobe Audition for cropping. I think it's a good way to put what I do.
Audition is good. I use Premiere just because that's what I use for video editing, and it's what I'm familiar with. But Audition is pretty good.
I use Pro Tools, and I have a backup license for Reaper. Because
Nice.
sometimes you lose that iLock, or you're traveling, you're like, oh, son of a.
People like Audacity, and it's free.
Audacity's free, and that's totally cool as well. I mean, I literally started out in theater, and I had to use Pro Tools. Like, this is what we do. I was like, okay, cool. But then that just goes to show we all use different things, so you can use something different too. Totally fine. And with that, thank you very much. Really quickly, where can we find you if you want to be found?
Shepodcast.com.
The Prop History Podcast or at Props to History.
I love Twitter, so feel free to contact me at Mr. Rob Roberts, because the spammer took Rob Roberts. So Mr. Rob Roberts on Twitter, and please don't be shy if you have any follow-up questions. I'm happy to answer.
Same.
TCM.com/podcast.
Awesome. And thank you all for being on the panel. Thank you for listening and watching. My name is Sean Weiland. You can find me at @mail_NPC on Twitch, Twitter, and the thing. What? We did thank Blueberry. We spent like 5 minutes just going, I love you, Blueberry.
But thank you, Blueberry, for sponsoring this track.
Thank you, Blueberry. Oh, and our charity this year,
Oh,
Big
right.
Brothers, Big Sisters of Metro Atlanta or of Atlanta. They're in the area. They're all around. There's a whole big blurb on the back, but essentially you can donate to them. What's the number on there?
Text mentor, that's MENTOR, to the number 243725.
And DragonCon is matching your donations dollar for dollar up to $100,000. So it's super, super important. It's a great charity. I was actually a part of it when I was a little. And I mean, I still remember my big, and it's a wonderful experience that you can give to a child and to a grown up, really. Kids are awesome.
Nice.
Most of the time, unless they're gaming online. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Oh, no, you're good. He's desperate. He's out there.
Not saying that.
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yes. Yes. I was. They said I would go both ways. I studied. I would semester to semester. I would do a semester in audio and a semester on stage.
When I was
So I learned sound design that way, and then also that. So that's how I got into voice acting and podcasting.
Maybe at the time you guys were
It's been an interesting culture because it was unique in that we were a gaming podcast that already existed. I was very lucky that I got on that train. So because we were on like every iTunes sites, and then the iTunes kind of fed from them. So yeah, we were on iTunes day one. So yeah, that was around the time we were in middle school or whatever. Yeah, we probably popped right up our old to-go edition.
It's awesome. I love this.